Hey everybody, welcome to those of you that are starting to join. We'll get started here in just a few moments. Looks like there was a little issue with the Zoom room, so apologies for that. So come on in and we'll get started here in just another moment or two. Thank you. All right, hey everybody, I think we'll get started here. Looks like we have a couple of you guys from yesterday and that's good and that's the audience I was hoping for. So welcome back. Glad you came back. That's a good sign. What we're going to be doing today is focusing on Cloud SIEM administration. So yesterday we did Cloud SIEM fundamentals. Today we're going to be doing administration. The material from today is going to be similar to yesterday. It's going to build upon yesterday. Some of it might be even a touch repetitive, so I might kind of not fast forward, I'm going to be doing it live, but you kind of zoom through a few portions here and there. As usual, Odell is with us, so if there's any questions, go ahead and ask those in the chat. He'll be manning that. But other than that, we'll get going here. So everyone should see my screen. Yeah, I think we're good to go. So once again, Cloud SIEM administration, hopefully you're in the right place. Now for our agenda, pretty similar to yesterday in regards to we're going to do slides, we're going to do labs, we're going to do slides, we're going to do labs, so on and so forth, kind of alternate back and forth. So we'll be doing that shortly. Yeah, cool. And then also the other reminder of the free food. So, you take the class, you pass the certification, which I guess is most important. You send us your certificate, and then you get that free $15 Uber Eats out voucher. It might take more than 48 hours. We're a little backlogged, but it shouldn't take too much longer. So feel free to take advantage of that, especially if you're here yesterday, you're here today. That's 2 free meals, and you earned them. So, all right, but now let's go ahead and get into the content for today. Now, these first group of slides, like I said, are going to be repetitive. So I'm still going to go through them because they deserve to be gone through, but maybe just to hit the acceleration a little bit. So Cloud SIEM data pipeline. Started to talk about this yesterday, but bears repeating because if we don't know what Cloud SIEM is, then we're kind of in the wrong place. So as a reminder, Cloud SIEM is going to be that cloud-based enterprise-grade security information and management system, and that's where that acronym comes from. Cloud SIEM is going to take Sumo Logic's core functionality, which is going to include things like data collection, ingestion, storage, and threat intelligence. And then Cloud SIEM is that purchased add-on with an ever-expanding library designed for security operations. Now, because it's designed for larger data volumes, many organizations will need to ingest a large amount of data each day for insights to surface in Cloud SIEM. Now, we looked at this yesterday, and today we're going to be really focusing on the first half of this, but as a reminder, let's go through the whole pipeline. And so Cloud SIEM is a powerful tool. It's going to take millions of log messages and funnel them down into a handful of actionable security insights. So come on, there we go. So at that first level, those logs are going to be collected and ingested by Sumo Logic and turned into messages. Then they're going to be parsed, mapped, and enriched into Cloud SIEM's records. Now, as we really focused on yesterday, this is where we kind of jumped in. Once we have these records, those records are compared to rules. If a rule is triggered, that entity is extracted, that severity score is assigned, and a signals will be created. And then if enough signals with the same entity cluster together, that's when they become that insight. Now, as a Cloud SIEM administrator, it's going to be your job to make sure that this pipeline flows smoothly. As mentioned in this course, we're going to be focusing on the first part of this pipeline. So we're going to look at how to forward your data to Cloud SIEM, how to customize the schema mappings, how to start to tune the SOC content to support the analysts on your SOC team. All these customizations and optimizations will help you reduce false positives and enable your SOC analyst teammates to investigate hunt threats faster. Now into our example. As a reminder for this example, we're using Sumo Logic Coffee, but it of course could be any organization that chooses to ingest their data into Sumo Logic. In that regard, Sumo Logic is going to collect and ingest potentially millions of log messages. Those messages will then be forwarded to Cloud SIEM, and that's going to be the process that's going to be set up using the Sumo Logic interface. Now, before we just start shoving data into Sumo Logic, we want to ask, as it says right here, what data are you ingesting? It's going to be a good idea for you to periodically examine your ingestion and sending to Cloud SIEM. What are you sending to us? And so as an admin for data ingestion, you're going to be responsible for that. And so you want to ask yourself these questions. First one, are you ingesting enough data? Cloud SIEM is going to take millions or thousands, but potentially up to millions of records and boil them down into just a handful of insights. Most organizations ingest more than 50 gigs of data every day to start finding any insights. If your ingest volume is smaller than this, you might want to consider sending more data to Cloud SIEM or using another security solution like our threat intelligence app. On the flip side, though, more data doesn't always mean more insights. The threat detection logic built into Cloud SIEM generally prevents false positives. However, some organizations choose to ingest or store less data as a way to cut costs. One solution is to partition your data into different tiers and only send some of that data along to Cloud SIEM. Now, are you ingesting the right data? Cloud SIEM doesn't Cloud SIEM doesn't just work on quantity alone. Quality data will really affect your performance as well. So as a best practice, you want to bring in quality data sources that are supported by Cloud SIEM. High-value data sources are going to include things like CloudTrail logs, Windows event logs, AWS logs, guard duty logs. And you also want to consider whether your data is structured and has key value pairs, or if it's unstructured like plain text files. Most of the data ingested into Sumo Logic kind of falls in between and considered to be semi-structured, like a JSON log. Now, once you started to answer these questions, you can start to assess what is and isn't working for you and your SOC team. And then you can partition your data in Sumo Logic and forward some of it or all of it to Cloud SIEM. Now, after you forward data to Cloud SIEM, after you forward your data from Sumo Logic to Cloud SIEM, your log messages must go through a little processing first. First, Cloud SIEM is going to process the messages and turn them into records. Each record is going to contain the information from a message, which is going to be parsed into key value pairs, mapped to a Cloud SIEM schema, and enriched with other data. Now, this process is usually automatic, but must be completed for certain types of custom data sources. If you do need to configure log and ingest mappings, there's going to be certain details you need to know about your data, like, once again, whether it's structured or unstructured, whether it has a syslog header. What data type is it? Is it JSON? Is it XML? You also need to know the vendor itself, such as, is it a Windows event log, a Palo Alto firewall log, an AWS guard duty log? And once you start to know the details of your data, you can start to consult the Sumo Logic documentation for specific help for configuring your data pipeline. Now, in this course, we're going to ingest and process simple structured JSON log messages to demonstrate the configuration process. So we're going to do that as a lab soon, probably about 10 minutes or so. All right, but before we do that lab, just a couple more slides here. And so we looked at this slide yesterday. This is a good example of that parsing that's taking place, actually the parsing, mapping, and enriching. Because let's follow this log message down the pipeline. Once again, the message is going to be parsed and extracted from the record. It's going to be mapped to a set of key value pairs. That step is going to create semi-structured data. It's also going to turn that semi-structured data into that key value pair where we have source device underscore IP is the key, and the value is 127.0.0.1 with those dots, normalized from hyphens. So now we have this information mapped onto the Cloud SIEM schema. Once it's done, the record can be enriched with other information that might be pulled from match lists or threat intelligence databases, such as its threat level. These normalized records are then sent down the Cloud SIEM pipeline and compared to rules. Now, once again, Each record is ingested into Sumo Logic, I keep saying Sumo Logic, which it is, but specifically Cloud SIEM. When it's ingested into Cloud SIEM, it's going to be compared to those hundreds of built-in and custom rules. If a rule triggers, that entity is extracted, that signal is created. And if a record matches the criteria specified in a rule, then Cloud SIEM creates that signal and starts tracking that entity. As a reminder, that entity in a signal is going to be something like an IP address, a MAC address, a host name, and it's going to be extracted from the records. In order for rules to work properly and create good signals and entities, Cloud SIEM admins must set up proper login ingest mapping so this important information can be extracted from the records. Now, Cloud SIEM, when we saw this yesterday, Cloud SIEM takes everything one step further and correlates those signals into manageable number of insights. And we saw those insights and that threat investigation taking place in the Cloud SIEM fundamental cert jam, which I believe everyone here attended yesterday. All right, whoop, mouse keeps jumping. Now, what I want to talk about next is the Sumo Logic UI and the Cloud SIEM UI, because as an administrator, you're going to need to use both Sumo Logic and Cloud SIEM to perform different tasks. So what tasks are there? Well, the first is talking about RBAC controls, or role-based access controls. All privileges for Cloud SIEM are going to be controlled in the Sumo Logic UI. Now, we're not going to really explore this too thoroughly with our training admin accounts, but it's important for you to know this when you provision your own SOC teams with your own accounts. And you can create different roles with different levels of access to insights, content, and configuration. And as you see on the right-hand side of the screen, this is showing just some of those options that you have as you start to create your roles for your users within Sumo Logic. Now, the most basic role in Cloud SIEM is going to be view, and you see that right there. This level of access provides, kind of as it sounds like, view-only access to Cloud SIEM, but it is a prerequisite to all other access levels. So as an administrator or an account owner, you might want to have some of your users have access to Cloud SIEM, but not others. You might want some Sumo Logic admins to be Cloud SIEM admins. You might have some users that you want to be admins in Cloud SIEM, but not Sumo Logic. And you have that versatility. You can create all those custom rules using RBAC controls. Once again, we're not really going to go into the RBAC controls today. That's more of an administrative class feature. But if you have any questions about it, please ask. It's pretty straightforward. All right. Now I want to talk about some roles that are popular. And my mouse, there we go. And so talking about some SOC roles. Typically what we see is tier 1 and tier 2 SOC analysts will need access to insights for threat investigation. But you might want to restrict this further. You might want to prevent tier 1 analysts from deleting insights. And so you can start to customize and fine tune this insight access as you're seeing right here. Now, in addition to access to insights, you might want to give your tier 2 and your tier 3 SOC analysts access to the content feature. That role privilege will allow users to create custom rules, custom insights, custom match lists, and other SOC content. Once again, you can also customize and fine tune that access if you only want certain roles to be able to create or delete or manage certain kinds of content. And then finally, some tier 3 SOC analysts and SOC admins will need access to configuration. This privilege will allow your users to create log mappings, custom entities, and create custom actions. And once again, that can be customized as well. It's just really an overview of what you can do with RBAC controls for Cloud SIEM. So just want to show some of those. And when we utilize the training accounts a little bit later, we're going to have some of this enabled, some of it not. So you're not going to have true or full 100% access, but enough to get the job done. Now, there's going to be several features only available to administrators. And here on the screen, we see a broader view of the options. If you were with us yesterday, when we logged into the system, we only had some of these. Here are more of them. So what are some of these options? As a Cloud SIEM administrator, as long as you have some configuration access, you'll see this gear or this cog icon that we see on the top right of the screen. Once again, depending on the RBAC controls, you might see some of those menu items. Full access is going to include what you see here: incoming data, entities, users, and integrations. Each of these areas allow the admin to configure the data that's coming into Cloud SIEM, how the threat detection engine uses it, and how analysts can interact with the data to complete their investigations. Now, Cloud SIEM admins may also see additional options under the content menu that other roles do not, depending on how the RBAC controls are set up. And yesterday, when we went to content, I think we only saw rules, rule tuning, and custom insights, if I remember correctly. And there's certainly more. Some of these we'll use today, most of them we won't, but at least you see a broader picture of what is available to you. Now, as I've been alluding to, there are many aspects of the admin menus, both in Cloud SIEM and Sumo Logic, but we're not going to see all of them today because we wanted to give you limited access. One, to kind of protect our environment, but also it's a real world example. So you can kind of see how some of your analysts and your admins on the team might need only pieces of the system that they're responsible for. You don't have to give access to everybody for everything. You can be granular, and that's important. All right. One more slide before we hit the slides. One more slide before we hit the labs. And so as a Cloud SIEM admin, you're going to use potentially both Sumo Logic UI and the Cloud SIEM UI. And even if you're primarily focused on Cloud SIEM, you want to be comfortable using both interfaces. So when do you need to use both? Or when do you need to use each one, rather? So on the left-hand side of the screen, the Sumo Logic UI. If you want to add collectors and data sources that will be used in Cloud SIEM, Sumo Logic UI is going to be needed. If you need to write extraction rules to help parse your logs so they can be better used as records in Cloud SIEM, Sumo Logic UI. If you need to configure partitions and data tiers and decide which data is going to get forwarded to Cloud SIEM, going to be done in the Sumo Logic UI. And then you're going to configure your users and your roles for both Sumo Logic and Cloud SIEM within the Sumo Logic interface. And once again, that's covered in our Sumo Logic administration class. This is Cloud SIEM administration, so we don't cover the admin console within Sumo Logic UI. If there's questions about it, let me know, but like I said, it's very straightforward, or pretty straightforward. You have a lot of control, so a lot of versatility as well. So that's when you use the Sumo Logic UI, is all those reasons in the box. Well, when will you use the Cloud SIEM UI? Well, you're going to use the Cloud SIEM UI if you need to configure the log and ingest mappings that are going to take those log messages and turn them into records. If you want to create custom content to help with threat investigations, like things like rules and match lists and insights. Finally, if you want to customize the actions, the context actions, the workflows, that's going to all be done in the Cloud SIEM interface. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and start to log into the environment. Now, the account we're going to use today is going to be a little bit different than the one we used yesterday. Yesterday, we were using the training analyst account. Today, we're going to be using the training admin account for the reason kind of as just went over. So hopefully you're paying attention, but it gives us more rights, it gives us more ability. And that's kind of the point of this class, is to show that advanced ability. So we're going to go to service.sumologic.com. That's the same. This time we're going to do training plus admin number. So not training plus analyst, training plus admin number. You can use the same 3-digit number you used yesterday or not. It really doesn't matter. So totally up to you. And then that password is going to be admin22 ! So go ahead and log in. I'll give you all a moment to do so. The other thing I'm going to do while you're logging in is I'm going to put that lab guide in the chat. So hopefully you're able to access it. And I'm going to give just everybody just a few moments to do. Once you log in, if you could just, as Christopher already did, put your 3-digit number in. All right, so I'm going to log in with you, and then we'll continue. All right, so hopefully you're logged in or are logging in. If you need help, once again, Odell's here for you, or I am as well. So once you get logged in, you should be, well, in Sumo Logic. You might be in the screen I'm looking at, you might not be. Regardless, you don't really need to be. So closing all the tabs is probably a good place to be. Logging in, let's see, make sure you're at service.sumologic.com. Try a different set of a different three-digit number, excuse me. So while you're all getting in, once again, you should have Sumo open or getting there. When my bookmarks are still showing. And then what I'm also going to do is utilize that lab guide. Where did I just put it? And then here's my little lab guide. All right. So I think we're good. The first lab is okay, cool. Gabby's in too. Cool. Yeah, so I think we're all together now. So once we logged in, and then we're going to take a look at the lab guide. Now, this lab guide's more robust than yesterday. It has 9 labs, actually, I guess 10 if lab 0 is considered a lab, which it is. And so we're going to go through these, like we did yesterday. We're going to do a few of these labs, and we're going to go back to the deck, back and forth. So let's start with lab 0, which is logging in. So we should all be logged in. And then once we're logged in, what we want to do is just go to Cloud SIEM Enterprise. Clicking on it should bring us in there. Let me, I apologize. I had to re-authenticate to my VPN. Let me just do this real fast. I apologize. Although I did do it before class, but it didn't take. Why did it take? Just one moment here. Like I said, I apologize for this. All right, so I'm going to go to Cloud SIEM Enterprise. There we go. And the issue I was just having, this is an internal Sumo Logic because of, but no, it's really more my problem. I wasn't on VPN. Now I am. I'm good. So apologize. So once we get logged in, and this screen should look familiar to you. You saw it 24 hours ago. So, and so now we're done with lab 0. All right. What we're going to do next is lab 1. So lab 1 is having us explore the UI. Now we explored some of it yesterday, of course, but now we want to explore things that are a little more administrative based. So what I want to point out here is that cog icon. As a reminder, you might not have seen it yesterday because we didn't have you getting access to these features. So now you do have access to it. What else do we want to point up in here? Now the help icon here, certainly we want to point you to help. Help is always good. There's a few things I want to point out in the help. One is just documentation. As you've learned yesterday when taking the exam or previously, Sumo Logic documentation, it's helpful. Here it is. There's lots of it, quite thorough. The other thing I want to point out under here, though, is where did announcements go? Oh, it's under here. That's right. We moved it. So under announcements, what we have, and I apologize, I do need to update that lab guide since we have moved the announcements under its own icon. But what the announcements are showing us are the rules that are being adjusted. So as I mentioned yesterday, and we'll mention today a few times, Sumo Logic, we give you essentially 700 or so pre-built rules that we manage and maintain. Well, here is information about them. You can see, we update them frequently. You can see the last updates and things like that. And so it's helpful for you to be aware of those. Let's see. And then, yeah, the other portion was documentation. Oh, and then the other thing, which I actually didn't show yesterday, and I should have. I showed you how to get back to the homepage. But what I didn't show you is how to get directly into Sumo Logic. What you can do is if you go to these 9 buttons, it's the switch apps icon. I don't know, that's really a universal icon, but for us it is. Switch apps and go to continuous intelligence platform. It's going to bring you into Sumo. Now, we showed you yesterday how to get into Sumo using the Sumo Logic search through the context actions, which is great. But if you want to just open an instance of Sumo, here's how to do this. And so essentially you can have your instance of Sumo, open your Cloud SIEM, and then have two tabs that you alternate with. So good shortcut. That's not particularly obvious. All right, let's see what else in this lab guide. That's about it really for this lab. Yeah, that's pretty much it for lab 1. So certainly if there's any questions, feel free to ask. The first two labs are pretty straightforward, so I don't expect too many. But what I want to do now is I want to go, just want to keep myself honest. I want to go back to my deck for a few moments. Now, while I'm going back to my deck, I hope or expect for you to follow along, but I also kind of expect you to kind of poke around in the Cloud SIEM environment now that you have admin rights. So feel free to, I'd like you to pay attention, but I'm also would not be surprised if you start, clicking. So go ahead and do so. But let's go ahead and go back to that deck just to, like I said, kind of keep me honest. So lab 0 was logging in. Lab 1 was going over the basics of the Cloud SIEM UI. And now before we get into lab 2 and 3, like I said, I just have a slide or two slides to set the table. So one of the first things we need to decide is what data we want to ingest or not ingest into Cloud SIEM. So we want to work on forwarding that data into Cloud SIEM. As an admin, there's going to be several steps that you must complete in order to forward your data into Cloud SIEM. Now, we're going to go over these at a high level right now, but the exact details do depend a little bit on which data set you're working with. So checking the Sumo Logic documentation for the specific instructions is best. That being said, as a kind of generic instructions, first, you need to request backend configuration. Now, this is a one-time setup for each Sumo Logic organization. Often the Sumo Logic account rep will complete the process for you. It's done in the Sumo Logic UI. In this case, we've done it already for you. Next thing you need to do is enable data forwarding. This is going to be done by adding a _SIEM forward equals true field or key value pair that you'll see when you set up a collector. For cloud data sources, there's even just a toggle box that you can check for SIEM processing, and we'll see that in the next lab activity. You also need to enable data forwarding each time you want to add a new data source into Sumo Logic, or you update your partitions, or make other changes to your data ingestion process. Now, finally, you want to go ahead and start to configure your log and ingest mappings. This process is usually automatic, but must be done for certain types of custom data sources. And this is done in the Cloud SIEM UI. We're going to see an example of this in the lab activities using a simple JSON log message in just a few moments. Now, an important note, when you enable data forwarding, Cloud SIEM is automatically going to start processing your log messages into records. Each record is going to contain the information from a message, which is going to be parsed into that key value pair, mapped to the Cloud SIEM schema, and enriched with other data. It's important to note that Cloud SIEM will not ingest historic data. And in other words, any new data ingested into Sumo Logic will be forwarded to Cloud SIEM as soon as you enable data forwarding. However, older data will not be processed by Cloud SIEM. Data will start flowing from Sumo Logic into Cloud SIEM within a few minutes of enabling data forwarding. And you can expect the signals and insights to start generating within a few hours. Now, before we start to configure the log and ingest mappings, it's important that you ask yourself a few questions about your data. So is your data structured or semi-structured, like a JSON file? Or is it unstructured, like plain text? Does your data have a syslog header that can be used as part of the parsing process? What type of data are you working with? Are you going to be using JSON, XML, Leaf, or something else? And depending on which one you're using, there's going to be, once again, different best practices in the Sumo Logic documentation. Have you processed your data with the Sumo Logic field extraction rule? Doing so can make the Cloud SIEM log mapping process much easier. And then finally, what vendor or product does your data come from? Are they Windows Events logs, Palo Alto firewall logs, GuardDuty logs, etc.? Knowing the details of that data is going to help you so that when you consult the Sumo Logic documentation, you can be very specific for configuring your data pipeline. Now, in this course, as I've mentioned a few times, we're going to ingest and process simple structured JSON log messages to demonstrate this configuration process. And so let's go ahead and do so now. So I'm going to get out of my slide deck. I'm going to get back into Sumo. And now I'm going to start to do lab 2. Now with lab 2, we're going to want to actually start within Sumo Logic SIP, the traditional Sumo Logic, not in Cloud SIEM. Because what we want to do is, in this lab, as it says, we want to go ahead and enable data forwarding for an HTTP source. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a simple HTTP source, and then we're going to go ahead and enable data forwarding for it, and then we can start to send data and observe the data flow. Kind of just reading the lab there, but that's what we're going to do. So to do so, we're going to go ahead and jump into the Sumo Logic UI. If we're not already in there or don't have it open, as a reminder, the 9 dots, clicking on SIP, that brings us into Sumo Logic. Once we're in there, and it's done loading after a moment or two, there we go. Now we can go ahead and start to go ahead and actually go into our collection. So what we want to do is we want to go to manage data, and we want to go to collection. So just want to make sure we're all together. Now, once we're in collection, what we should start to see are those collectors. These are those essentially lightweight applications that are grabbing data and bringing it into Sumo Logic. And what we want to do is we want to utilize one of the collectors that have already been created. There should be a collector, it should be the very first one because these are in alphabetical order, called admin-training-sim. And so we want to go ahead and utilize that that collector that's pre-built for us, or pre-built. Okay way to say it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the admin-training-sim collector, and we're going to go to the far right and go to add source. Now we need to choose what type of source do we want to utilize. And for today, we're going to, as I mentioned in the lab setup, or as it says in the preamble for lab 2, we're going to be using an HTTP source. So what we want to do is look for the source called HTTP logs and metrics. It's going to look pretty identical to the one I just clicked. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this guy. And now I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. Once again, we want you to use those your initials to kind of keep that theme going that we did yesterday to help us identify it. So I'm going to call it HTTP training data JB23234. I want to give it a source category. And so I want to go ahead and use a source category, and I'll use source category of training JB, my initials. Now here's where we want to set up the processing. This is where we go ahead and enable the sending of data to Cloud SIEM. Check. That's it. Easy. Once we have that box checked, we're done. Now we can go ahead and click save. Now, when we click save, it's going to pop up a URL. And we want to keep that URL. So we want to copy it, ideally, to maybe like a notepad or someplace, just we can kind of throw it for a few moments. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to put it in, I'll just stick it over here somewhere. Okay, so now I have my URL saved. Now what I want to do is send a log message to Cloud SIEM. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do that. We're going to take a log message and we're going to send it through Cloud SIEM, and we're going to see where it goes. So what we want to do here is we want to open up Terminal or PowerShell. Now this depends a little bit on your device, on your laptop. You might have some restrictions running a curl command, although probably not. Well, yeah, you might. And so if you can participate in this lab, great. If you can't, it's okay. It's a quick lab and we move on kind of quickly after it. But hopefully you can participate and follow the instructions. So what I want to do here is I want to open up Terminal. I want to do a new window. Let me go There we go. So I have a clean window here. I'm gonna make it bigger. That's not really helping with the font size. Here, let me try that. Nope, that's not doing it. All right, well, you can see it. I think it's not too small in there. So what I want to do is I want to copy the curl command that is part of the lab, and I want to edit it. I want to edit it in 3 different ways, or 2 different ways, actually, excuse me. The first thing I want to do is I want to specify under our threat name, more specifically under our attacker name, an attacker. I'm going to use my initials, or I'm going to use my name, or something fairly unique, something I'll recognize, JB attack. The other thing I want to do is I want to specify the URL that I copied or that I created in Sumo Logic, because this is my destination. This is where I'm about to send my data. And so I want to copy that, go all the way to the end. And paste in my URL. So ideally I have really exactly what's here is what I have ideally with your own URL and your own attack name. Hopefully everything pasted properly. Pasting from a PDF sometimes gets a little funky, but hopefully everything went well. And so what I'm going to do is now run this and got no errors, which is a good sign. So hopefully you ran yours and you got returned back here with just kind of a blinking cursor, and that's what we want. Now, this next step can take a few moments. I'm kind of tap dancing, going a little slow because I'm trying to wait for it to occur, but it might take a few moments. But what we want to now do is now we want to go into Cloud SIEM and we want to look at our records, and we should find this record type. Now, this record type might fail. It might not. I'll get into kind of that in a few moments, but we should be able to find our record. Once again, it might take a few moments as well. So what I want to do here is I want to go back into Cloud SIEM. There it is. I want to go into records. So I want to go up to records. I can rely on the last 15 minutes. Once again, like I said, it might take up to 15 minutes. It shouldn't take that long, usually about 7 minutes at most. But what I should be able to do is use my filter to say, show me the metadata source category is whatever source category you define. Now, once again, I might not get any results right away, and that's okay because it can take a few moments. Let's see, your curl command is not returned. The one thing I would check is the fact that take the entire curl command that you copied, 2 lines, and kind of back up the second line to the first one and give it an extra space. Sometimes it adds a hard return or an extra invisible character, something like that. So just going to wait a few more moments here. Let me go ahead and rerun this. And so it's still, oh, there we go. Mine came through. Now yours might not come through right away. Although it should, you saw mine. What was that? So like I said, 5 minutes or so. Now it came through, but it gave an error, or well, it came through, but let's look at what actually came through. Because what came through is correct, but let's look at what like I said, what happened. What we see here is a record, but we see a failed record, failure. Failures. Usually failure is scary, failure is bad. Failures, yeah, failure's bad. And failures are bad. But here we're intentionally getting a failure. The reason we're intentionally getting failure, and the log describes why, and I'm going to probably not read it to you, but pretty much explain what it's doing, is very simply the record is failing to occur. It's coming into Sumo Logic, it's coming over to Cloud SIEM, but it's failing to turn into a record. And that's because, as it says, the JSON log message does not have any log or ingest mapping associated with it. It got this message and it doesn't really know what to do with it. And so it can't take it to that next step of parsing and mapping and enriching because it just it doesn't know how to. We haven't given it any guidelines, any steps, any help in that regards. And that's what we're going to do next is we're now going to fix this in the next activity. We are going to provide some mapping, and then we're going to re-ingest this curl command, and that time it should work, making a acceptable or successful record. So that's where we're heading. And so that's where we're going to continue to go to. So let me just go to my lab, my slide deck again. So we should be now completed with lab 3. And hopefully you see, once again, your record, and hopefully your record says failed, which once again, weird to wish for a failed record, but that's where we are. All right, so I think we're pretty good. All right, let me go back to my slides here. And let's go through a couple of slides here, or well, we're kind of pretty quickly. Essentially what we're doing is this slide, really. And so what we want to now do is we want to take that IP address, we want to normalize it, we want to turn it into a key, into a field, into a value, and have the system recognize it using the ingest mapping. And so that's where we're going. So let's go ahead and go back into Sumo Logic. Go back into more specifically Cloud SIEM, and let's do lab 4. And so in lab 4, let's go ahead and start to create that ingest and log mapping. So first we're going to go in here, or are still in here. We're going to go to that gear icon, and we're going to go ahead and select under integrations, Sumo Logic. Now, keep in mind, once again, in the real world, you might not have access to all these options. As you saw yesterday with the analyst account, you didn't, but you have more rights here, and so more ability. So we go to the gear icon, we go to Sumo Logic. And what we will now see are those ingest mappings that exist in here. And there's stuff in there. Now what we want to do is we want to create our own. So we want to create. We want to reference the source category that we used earlier. So hopefully you remember what you used. We want to tell the system. So what we're telling the system here is look out for this type of message that has a specific source category, that is a JSON format, that et cetera, et cetera. So format is going to be JSON. Now for the vendor and for the product, we ideally, of course, in the real world would put the actual vendor or product, Microsoft, Palo Alto, whatever it might be. For today, we're just using our own kind of companies or scenarios. So I'm going to use vendor JB. I'm going to use product JB. The event ID I don't need. And then I want to enable this because I want to turn it on. Go ahead, click create. Should create, should also see the ingest mapping number go up. I did. If I scroll down, I see mine, I see a couple of yours, and so we're doing good. Now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and set up that log mapping. We have half the scenario or half the problem or solved. We have the ingest mapping, but now we need to do that log mapping. So what we're going to do is once again go to the gear icon, except this time we're going to go to incoming data. And incoming data is going to contain the feature of log mappings. Clicking on that, we're going to start to see some information about log mappings that might exist within the system. Many of these, virtually all of these are pre-created by Sumo Logic, but we can create our own. When we create it, the first thing we need to decide is what type of structuring for mapping do we want to use? And this is going to be dependent on what type of data we have. In this case, we're using JSON data. JSON data is considered semi-structured data, which is considered structured data. And so we want to select structured mapping. Went through similar screens yesterday. We want to give this a name. And so we're going to keep our theme of our initials. I'll put the number in, although just the initials is good enough for me. And now we need to start to do our if and our there. So if the input matches, then it's going to create a record. Now we need to fill in a bunch of stuff because the system is telling us there's 7 fields that we need to enter values for. And so we're going to go ahead and do those. So we got our name. What we want to do is under the input matches. So for the vendor and the product, we want to specify those vendors and products we just created in the previous step. We want to specify the format, once again, JSON. And now for this last portion, this event ID matches regex, we can go just put a star, meaning we want to look at all of our records. We could limit it to a certain set, but we want to look at everything. And so wildcard usually does that. Now, as it shows, I still need to enter more stuff in here. And so I'm going to do so. The next thing is record of type, but I am going to leave that blank for now. There's a weird, it's not a bug. I guess it's a feature really, but it helps to pick another one of these fields, define these before we select the record of type. So we're doing those steps, not out of order, just a kind of a little bit out of order. So what we're going to do here is we're going to, before we do the record of type, we're going to specify for the vendor and the product, we want it to match what we input. So basically, if it sees product JB, and let me get rid of that space in there, it's going to create a record with the product called product JB. So it's really passing that information on. Now, what we can do here, or what we have to do here, is we need to specify our fields down below. And so with our fields, what we want to do is specify the input and the output. What is going to be in the message we're about to send, and what do we want it to output into, or into. So for example, we have in our curl command, we have that IP equals 127.0.0.1 that we wrote. Well, we want to call this device underscore IP. That's the name we use. As you saw, that's the name we used yesterday. We used today. We've just our more common name. There we go. And then I can add field. I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to do this for threat name. If you remember, we had a field called threat name where we put our initials or our name. Well, in this case, you know what? I want to output this and I want to call it threat underscore name because I prefer it. I can call it whatever I want. I should call it something reasonable that's common to me, my users, my peers, but that's certainly a good name, a threat name. And there we go. Once we have it in there, then we can click add field. And so what we should have now are two new field mappings, one for IP to device IP and one for threat name to underscore, to threat underscore name, excuse me. Now, once we have these done, now we can go back up to the record of type. And now we can click authentication. Once again, just a weird behavior. All right. So now I have my entire thing filled out. I don't have a exclamation point with a triangle here. So that means at least I have everything filled out, whether or not it's proper or not, I don't know, but it should be at least pretty good to go. And so I'm going to click submit. As before, the mapping can be created successfully. I could go through, I'm not going to bother, but I could go into my gear and look for the log mapping specific to the one I just created. I don't really need to, it's kind of just unnecessary, but I could do that. All right, so what I want to do next, let's see, where are we on time and all that? Let me just check. I think we're doing pretty good. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to start lab 6 and we're going to take a break while we do lab 6. And let me elaborate, although I think you'll understand why. What we want to do now is we want to send another log message to Cloud SIEM. We now have our mapping, our ingest and our log mapping set up. So in theory, when we send this log message, send the log message through the curl command, ideally it will get accepted and it will not be failed because it will have the proper mappings. So what I want us to do, because it's going to take, as you saw, it can take, as you saw, 5-8 minutes for it to return. What I'm going to do here is I'm very simply going to rerun my command. And what I'm going to do now is going to take a break. But what I want us to do, or I guess I'll get it kind of set up, is I want to go ahead and now go to my records. And now I want to look for that metadata source category is training JB. Now I'm not going to see that new one yet. Once again, it takes a few moments, but when I refresh this, once we get back from break, I should have now two records, one that failed and one that got accepted. So let's go ahead and take that break. Let me set up the calendar. We'll do our timer. We'll do a 7-minute timer. Go ahead, run that curl command, and then go ahead, grab beverage, grab a little snack, do whatever you need to do, and then we'll come back. So I'm going to start that timer, go grab a snack, come on back. We'll do a few more labs, and then we'll take that exam. So thanks, everybody. See you all in a few moments. And yeah, see you all in a few moments. All right, everyone, welcome back from break. Hopefully you had a good little break. And so what we wanted to do now, and hopefully what you're seeing is if we now refresh this, we should see two records. Actually, I take that back. We're going to see, we want to change the time frame. So we don't have to change the time frame. They're both failed. So then there's going to be an issue with the mapping. So what we see here, let's see, what happened if things went well. So what we see on the bottom is the one that didn't go so well. And at the top, what we see is the one that did go better because it's been processed. It's been authentic. We see the authentication. We see everything. So if they both failed, yeah, I would just double check things. Yeah, I would take a look at it, Christopher. Feel free to run another one to see what might not be matching up here. All right. So hopefully most of us are together and we're able to see your second one that was accepted properly. All right. So I'm going to go back to my slides. And we're going to go through some of this we went through yesterday. So this is we're going to kind of cruise through this, and then we're going to hit the labs again. So we'll be finished quite early, which is okay. But let's do what we got to do still. So want to talk about customizing and tuning your Cloud SIEM rules. So we have our properly parsed record in Cloud SIEM, and it's going to be compared to those rules and potentially generate signals and insights. Remember, rules are going to be one of the most important pieces of the Cloud SIEM threat detection engine. All the records ingested into Cloud SIEM are going to be compared to all those rules that exist in Cloud SIEM. If there's the match, as kind of reminder again and again, the entity will be extracted, the signal will be created, the entity will be tracked and make correlate with other signals to create insight. And that's where those threat investigations occur. Now, as a Cloud SIEM admin, you're going to have the ability to create any rule type. And your SOC analysts on your team who might have appropriate privileges might want you to create custom rules. And so we're going to go through those. Now, we went through some of these yesterday. We're going to go through different ones today, so I don't think we repeat the labs. But as a reminder, there's 4 rule types that are available to you. So once again, there's that match rule, and that's the one we used yesterday. That very simple Boolean statement, essentially true or false, is a IP on a banned list, yes or no, and very, very binary. Threshold rules, and we're going to use these today. These are going to be triggered when a match is found after a certain number of times. So as a reminder, if 1 failed login is okay, but 5 failed logins are not, we could create a threshold rule that fires after the 5th failed login attempt. With the chain rules, we can create rules that are going to fire when certain different events happen in a certain time window. So if we want to look for 5 failed login attempts followed by 1 successful login in a 1-hour period, we'd create a chain rule, and we're going to do that as well shortly. And then we have those aggregation rules. These are triggered when up to 6 different events accumulate over time, and just they're not used too much. So I don't think we're going to do an example with those today either. Now, while SOC analysts sometimes create these custom rules, it is normally done by those advanced users, those administrators. So let's go ahead and, well, we've seen this already, but as a reminder, when we're creating our rules, we have, I'm going to start to fast forward here a little bit, but we have our if and our then. And so we want to fill in both sides. We need to configure the rule, configure the conditions that are going to match, and using an if statement to do so. We can use those rule tuning expressions, which are those small exceptions that are like an end statement, which we used yesterday to set up the rule we created. Now, once everything's triggered, if it matches, then we can start to create our signal, and we can use a name that we like. We can use the MITRE ATT&CK tactic framework. We can set that severity and those scores. And so those are all important aspects of creating those rules. And we're going to go through those, go through it twice, I believe, right now. Those best practice when you start to create your custom rules, remember to check your existing rules first. Sumo has those hundreds of built-in rules. And so if you don't need to write a new one, don't. If you can just use a small change like a rule tuning expression, that's encouraged to do so. Knowing your system well, understanding the schema and log mappings of the records you've ingested into Cloud SIEM is going to be important. As an administrator, it's kind of your responsibility to know those inside and out. As that administrator, you want to know, once again, that risk appetite that your company might have. Outbound traffic for some organizations might be considered a threat. For some organizations, it might not be. And so they might give those scores that get triggered off a lot of outbound traffic very different on a scale. Some might give it a 0, some might give it a 5. Both are correct. It's just up to the organization to decide that severity. Knowing those rule types, as we're looking, or we'll be looking at in a moment, if we need to create a match rule and we create a chain rule, things might not work as well or not at all. And so knowing the rule types that we have available to us and using the proper rule type is a best practice. Those small changes, taking a severity score that you might want to change, don't change it from the example of 8 to a 2 right away. Change it to an 8 to a 7, see how it works, 7 to a 6, and start to dial it back that way. And then the best practice that we're using yesterday, and we will continue to use today, is when we create that rule, saving it as a prototype. And so that's going to allow us, or the system, to monitor the rule's behavior without creating new insights and alerts. And so a good way to test rules without junking up your system, which is always good. Here is the scoring that we talked about yesterday. So as a reminder, we may have a variety of different signals. Those signals might cluster together based on entities, but they don't turn into an insight until they achieve a specific score. And the score, as we discussed, is going to be 12 over a 14-day period. So those entities that are 12 or greater will become an insight. Those entities that are below 12 will not become an insight. And so that's what we're just showing here. All right, and finally, before we get to the labs and really kind of finish up today, there's going to be some other customizations that are available in Cloud SIEM. Creating these customizations sometimes requires admin level privileges, and so we want you to be aware of them in case the SOC analysts on your team need help in creating these things. So what are these things? First one's a match list. Match lists are going to allow you to group entities in Cloud SIEM that are being used in rules. So very similar to an allow list or a deny list. And so Cloud SIEM comes with dozens of standard match lists, but you can create your own. Now, there's going to be several ways for you to customize your insight. And one of those is going to be related to the score. And I've been alluding to the score. Now, remember, the default to cluster those entities together is, once again, an activity score of at least 12 over the last 14 days, but that's configurable. It's out of the box. It's standard. It's what we encourage you to use, but you make your own decisions. So you can increase or decrease that time frame. Increase or decrease that time frame. You can adjust the activity score threshold. And so you can create custom insights that will be created when certain rules are triggered, regardless of their severity score. So many different options there. Admins can also create custom actions, and we're going to see this in Lab 9. Analysts might use these action buttons to help complete their investigations, and we looked at these or pointed them out yesterday. You can use APIs when creating custom actions, so you have a lot of flexibility and essentially creativity. So you could do things like execute a playbook, create a Jira ticket, send a Slack notification. And admins can also create custom workflows. Now, by default, we mentioned this yesterday, when you want to mark a insight, you have the option to do new, in progress, or closed. But you can create a custom workflow that can create a new status. So for example, if you find that your analysts are frequently digging into the insights and keeping them open when they want to look into an insight, maybe you create a custom workflow called investigating. And that might keep it separate from other insights that might be at the stage of in progress. And so you can start to differentiate there. That's just a few examples of some of the customizations available in Cloud SIEM. There are more, and they're in the documentation, but we're going to use some of those in just a few moments. And now that those few moments have passed, let's go ahead and jump back into the labs. So what we're going to do now is lab 7, 8, and 9. So what I'm going to do here is I have my lab guide over here. I'm going to open up Cloud SIEM. If I don't have it still open and I have Sumo open, go back to Cloud SIEM Enterprise. But regardless, want to get into Cloud SIEM. And now what I want to do in Lab 7 is I want to write a threshold rule. What we want to do is we want to create a rule that's going to look for, as it says here, 3 unique Windows events IDs. And those IDs we want to be associated with failed logins. And during an hour, so we have a lot of specifics here. We want to look specifically for 3 unique Windows event IDs, specifically those IDs to be associated with failed logins. And we have a time period that we want to define. We want to see those failed logins within the hour or a hour. So let's go ahead and kind of put it all together. So we're going to go up to content and we're going to go to rules. And now we're going to create a rule. Once again, we see those rules already predefined, but we want to create our own. Now, once again, creating the rule or selecting the rule that's most appropriate for the situation is what you want to do here. We are telling you to do a threshold rule because we want to look for an alert within a count within a certain amount of time or a certain entity, and the entity is time in this case. So we're going to go ahead and click create under threshold. And now we're going to kind of continue using the naming scheme we have been using. So I'm going to call this fresh rule to my initials. Just do that. And now we want to start to define the ifs and the thens. So what needs to match, and if it matches, what signal is created or what details of that signal. So let's go ahead and do the if side first. The first thing we want to do is this feature of show advanced. And what we can do here and what we want to use is this first option of count only distinct values for a field. Now, what expression do we want to match? What we want to do is we want to match the expression that's in the lab in step B of metadata underscore device. There we go. Event ID is equal to 4625. 46625 representing a failed login. Now, how many failed logins do we want to look for? Do we want to look for 1? No, we wanted to look for 3 within an hour. So we want to match not 1, not 2, but 3. The field we want to match is we want to look at device IP. So we want to look at that device IP to see those IPs that have failed to log in. And now we can set our time period. Do we want to look at these 3 failed logins in a 5-minute window? No, in this case, we want to do an hour window. And so we can specify. So what we have now is the left-hand side of the screen, which is now looking for those records, specifically 3 records that have that event ID within a 1-hour period. Now, if it finds that scenario, then we want to create a signal. And now we're going to specify that criteria. So we want to utilize the on entity of that device IP, basically carrying over that entity of device IP, because that's what we're going to be basing things on the left-hand side of the screen. We can go ahead and specify our tag. We're using or looking for failed logins, and so we can utilize the MITRE ATT&CK framework or technique of initial access. So we can go ahead and specify technique. Actually, excuse me, this is a tactic, initial access. And then what we want to do is we want to specify, well, the system's going to tell us what's required. We want to go ahead and just specify our summary and description. So I'm just going to put test in both of them. Actually, I really just need the description. The summary I don't need. And I could set a severity here. So if this occurs, is this a 10? Oh no, oh no. Or is this a 0, just monitor? Or is it in between? You know, put a value. Let's see. I'm gonna need to do my prototype, so I do want to go ahead and check that. But the system's letting me know I forgot something. What does it say? Link 1 recognition error. Let's see. There we go. I think that was just a thing with the PDF, copying from a PDF. So now I can go ahead and submit this. And now I've created that type of rule. Once again, I can go to content and rules and look for it if I really want to, but I don't need to. That's kind of overkill for right now. So I'm good. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to jump to lab 8. Now in lab 8, we're going to write a different type of rule. This is going to be a chain rule because what we want to do is we want to look for failed logins again, but this time we want to look for a successful login occurring after failed logins. More specifically, we want to look for one successful login after 10 failed logins from the same IP address within a 5-minute period. And so this is going to be a rule that requires more criteria because it's more advanced than the other type of rules. So what we're going to do is going to go to content and rule and go to create. Now we don't want to do a threshold. We're getting a little more advanced. And so that's why we're going to use a chain rule. We're going to click create on the chain rule. And essentially, kind of fill in the blanks here. So chain rule be, and now we can specify in our if triggered, we could specify those two different triggers. I guess I was going to say kind of different dimensions, but I don't know if that's proper phrasing here. But so we can go ahead and look for successful authentication and failed authentication at the same time. And that's what we want to do. So in step 6A, we want to look for this expression. And this expression is looking for failed login attempts. Now, do we just want to look for one failed login attempt? No, we want to look for 10. And so we can specify look for 10 falses. Now, we're not looking for 10 falses in a bubble. We want to look for 10 falses and 1 success. So what I'm going to do in the second portion of this section here is look for a true. And so now I'm looking for 10 falses and 1 true. If I wanted to look for 10 trues and 1 false, I could flip them around or do whatever I want. Now I want to group these. I want to group them by the entity field. So that I can leave okay. But the other portion I want to change is this portion right here. In this case, order is important to me. I don't want to just look for let's see. I don't want to just look for some falses, some trues. I want to look specifically for the order of 10 falses and then 1 true. And so I'm going to keep that exact order. Now, do I want to look for that in an hour time period? No, I want 5 minutes. And so I can just keep the 5-minute period that's there. Now on the right-hand side of the screen, if those conditions match, once again, to create that signal, I need to fill in the blanks. So what entity do we want to use? We're going to use that device IP again. We can go ahead and put those tags, that initial access again, because it's related to login attempts or it is related to login attempts. We need to go ahead and specify just the description. Yeah. The summary we can leave blank. I'll put something in there just to be nice. And then we're good to go. Once again, if we have the orange triangle, we know something is still needed, but I don't have it. So I think I'm good. I do, although actually before I do, I wanted to, and I've been telling you, make sure you check that box. I'm going to make it as a prototype. And now I'm going to click submit. And it's going to take a moment, but now it's created. And so wanted to show you now over the past 2 days, we've looked at creating 3 different rule types. As mentioned, that aggregation rule is just not used much, so that's why I didn't show it. But match is the easiest, well, it's the easiest. They're all easy to use. It's the simplest and probably the one you'll use most commonly, but now you've seen how to use a few of them, which is good. All right, so the last thing we want to do is wrap up with Lab 9, which is going to show us how to customize the Actions button. We looked at the Actions button yesterday, but now we can actually customize it for our own needs. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a action button that will allow us to alert a specific group. In this case, we're going to alert the incident response team. So let's create that custom action. It's really kind of quite easy to do so. So we're going to go up to the gear icon again. And once we're in there, we're going to go to actions located under integrations. So once again, gear, integrations, actions. Under the actions, we're going to see those actions that exist already. A lot of these are going to be predefined by Sumo, but we see things like Slack. We see some emails configured, but we can also create our own. And so that's what we want to do. We want to create an action. We're going to go ahead and give it a name and just use the same convention we've been using. Now we can start to decide, when do we want to utilize this action? In this case, we want to use it on demand. We could have some other setup here, but on demand is what makes sense, because it's something we want to actively be able to click on and utilize within the insight. Now we want to make it active, because that should be obvious. Now, what type of action do we want to use? As I was starting to show, we have a lot of different options. We can go ahead and integrate with Slack. We can integrate with PagerDuty or Microsoft Teams, or in this case, what we want to use, and is probably most common, is email. In this case, we want the ability for somebody to send this or utilize the sending via email via this action option that we're about to create. So under the email, we would specify who our email is going to. In this case, incident response at Sumo Logic coffee.com. And so we would specify that. We can do a comma separated list. So if you want to have specific people notified in this action, or a mailing list, options up to you. But once you have it filled out, we're going to create it. Now, once it's created, when we go back to our actions page, we should see our incident response in there. And what we're going to do now is we're going to test it. And so the way we're going to test it is go into an insight. So we're going to go back to the insights, which we haven't really done today. We're going to go into insights. For this one, it doesn't matter which one we use, so just click any insight. I'm just going to scroll down. It really just doesn't matter which one we use. Actually, I'll skip out of this one. Looks like that's a custom one that somebody else has created, so I don't want to mess with theirs. I'll take this one. And very simply, what we're going to now do is go to the actions button, and we should now have those additional incident response actions that we just created. So now if I want to send this to the incident response team, execute this action, takes a moment or two. And now it's executed that. And now an email's been sent out to those individuals on the incident response team. All right, cool. Hopefully pretty straightforward. Let's see, that's going to conclude. Let me just get back to our deck, but that should conclude the slide. So we're done early today, which I don't think anyone's going to complain about. Let me just verify that we are done. Come on. No, I don't need to verify. I know we're done. There's no more slides. So certainly any questions, go ahead and please ask. Let's see, the question was, can you see what actions have been registered for an insight? That's a good question. Let's see, it should show up in here now that I ran this action. It should, where did it show up? Maybe it doesn't. Yeah, it's certainly not apparent. So that's a really good question, Jeff. It doesn't seem to show you which ones have been called, at least not obviously. But there should be a way. Yeah, good question. I'll need to check on that myself. It's got to be recorded somewhere. Yeah, a good question. So yeah, you stumped me with that one. All right, so let's go ahead and let's point you to the exam. Certainly, more questions, go ahead and shout, but for those of you that are ready. So, as a reminder, we're going to want to go back into Sumo Logic, SIP, the traditional environment. we're going to want to make sure that we're logged in with our own Sumo accounts and not as the training admin account. That training admin account, by the way, like the training analyst account we used yesterday, you're welcome to use. It's good for the next about 2 weeks or so. And so feel free to utilize it. It's a training account, so things get deleted. Don't put anything proprietary in there. But if you want to use some of those more advanced features in the training environment, feel free to do so. Just don't do anything horrible. Let me go ahead and log in here. So just to show you, and if you're ready to take the exam, feel free to just jump into it. But I just want to get you there. So as a reminder, you'll go into the certification portal. And then we're going to go to get certified. So when we go to get certified, we are going to be choosing the Cloud SIEM administration exam this time. So yesterday you took the Cloud SIEM fundamentals, today's Cloud SIEM admin. And so same guidelines as before, about 20 questions, 60 minutes to take it, open book, multiple choice, et cetera. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and start it. As a reminder, I'll go ahead and put that slide up about the food, because that's that's maybe most important to you, and I don't blame you. So let me put this in the chat as well. Yeah, there it is. Cool. All right, so let's start the exam. Thank you for attending. Thank you, for especially 2 days. I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully you found it helpful. And hopefully you can join us for other classes. We have some more coming up. Actually, the rest of the month is pretty quiet, but coming in July, we'll have some more stuff to teach you. So thank you again for attending. I and Odell will hang out here for a little bit. So if there's questions, of course, give a shout. But otherwise, once again, thank you for attending. We'll be sending out the recording and slides probably tomorrow, realistically Monday maybe, but you should get those shortly as well. So thank you everybody again, and I'm just going to put myself on mute and talk to you all in a little bit.